You ready to hit start with record? Or do the raffle tickets there?
No, people might still need raffle tickets.
Yeah, we'll do it later.
Okay.
You gotta be here at the end to get the win anyway, so. Did you hit the start record button?
Hit it.
What?
You hid the record. Ah, there it is.
All right, cool. Hi everyone, thanks for coming. For the sake of the camera, this is the San Francisco PHP Meetup Group. Hopefully everybody here in the room knows that as well. If not, well, you're in for a good treat. Tonight we have Sara from Facebook. She's going to be talking about the HipHop virtual machine. It should be a really interesting presentation. Yay! So it's really exciting. The room looks pretty cool here. We have 150 yes RSVPs. Looks like, what, about 70, 80 people showed up. So that's really good for us. The group's going back up again. That's thanks to all of you, so we really appreciate it. A couple of things, a quick announcement for next month on April 17th. We have George Perry from Mastery. He's going to talk about behavior-driven development with VHAP. So we're still kind of working out the thoughts and outputs on that, but he did a lot of good training stuff at Mastery. Had to do the BDD there. So it should be a really interesting one. We are looking for a speaker for May and June. So if you want to speak or know someone who would be a good speaker, let us know. We'll reach out to them and get it set up. Tonight for our raffle, we have some shirts from Mastery. We have some PHP Storm licenses. We have a $100 gift card to Amazon for their AWS services. And we have one left of the $2,000 Google Cloud credits. Sponsors tonight, we have Mastery, provided my time, Jacob's time. We have Neo and Digital Garage. They're going to stand from there. They're going to come up in a moment as soon as I find them. There it is. To say a quick thing about them. JetBrains, they're doing the PHP Storm licenses. O'Reilly's a recurring sponsor for us. Usually they do books. With the chaos tonight, I forgot to bring them down. Obviously, whatever affiliation Sara has is sponsoring her time as well. I don't know if Facebook's officially sponsoring or any of that sort of timing thing. Okay, well, Sara is sponsoring her own time, which is even better. So let me give Neo and Digital Garage a quick chance to say something.
Yeah, I'll just take just a second. Sara, thanks for coming. I'm excited about the talk. Yeah, hi, I'm Sam from Neo. Welcome to Digital Garage. This is a sort of an innovation hub created by Digital Garage, which is a Japanese investment company that's been around for about 20 years doing innovation in Japan. And the space was created to allow for some new companies, new startups to work here and bridge the gap between the startup community in the Bay Area and Asian markets that Digital Garage has access to here in that area if you want to move in that direction. So if any of you are in companies looking for a space to work, there is some space available. And Heather, who runs the space, is looking for people who are interested in getting set up in Digital Garage. I can connect you to her if you're interested in that. I work for Neo, which is a digital consultancy. We're upstairs there, hosted by Digital Garage as well. We do digital product development, and we also are always hiring smart engineers and XDs. So if you're looking to work for a really cool, innovative consulting company, come talk to me. We do lots of fun stuff. Back to you guys. Thanks a lot.
It's a good segue into the next part. Anybody out there looking to be hired? So, okay, we got some people. So, everybody who's looking to hire someone, stand up. All right. Other people, raise your hands back up again. There's your connections. So let's make it happen. So there'll be plenty of time afterwards to socialize all that.
Christians mingle in here.
So let's do that. And with that, over to Sara.
Hi everybody. Thanks for having me here. I learned something already tonight. That's engineers don't know how to use televisions. So we finally got all the technology working. Hopefully, theoretically, we're streaming. Terrified me personally. But I want to talk to you today about HHVM. HHVM is a HipHop virtual machine. It's sort of a drop-in replacement for PHP to run all those scripts you already have, all those sites you already have, but do it a lot faster and hopefully a lot cleaner. quick show of hands who's using PHP in their business or their work or whatever. Okay, a few PHP people. So unsurprising at a PHP meetup. Does everybody love the PHP language and thinks it has no weird eccentricities that surprise you on a daily basis? I love that. So yeah, PHP is a lot of fun. I curse it on a daily basis, but it is what it is. I'm going to talk to you, about, like I said, about HHVM. And so let's get started. And quick recap, what is HHVM? Like I already said, it is a drop-in replacement for your current PHP stack as it exists right now. This is pretty familiar. Linux, Apache, MySQL, PHP, web stack, or maybe Nginx or whatever else you happen to have already. It's how the web gets served. It's how most of the web gets served. Let's be completely honest. PHP is everywhere. So what part of this is HHVM trying to replace? Just the spot in the middle here. We take PHP out of the picture. APC becomes irrelevant because HHVM kind of has its own thing. We just put a new middle tier in there to handle the page processing. Static resources are still static resources. Your database is still your database. Nothing else changes. And hopefully, we process the same PHP code in the same way, and it just works magically. There's really kind of no way to tell if that's going to be the case or not until you run your code on this. So, like I just said, HHVM runs most PHP syntax. We are tracking public PHP as new changes are going in. The finally construct just hit PHP recently, so you can do a try, catch finally. We've added that as well. I think it's great. It's an awesome feature. Variax and Splat have just hit PHP in 5.6. And does anyone not know what I mean by Variax and Splats? Okay. These are different ways of doing functions with variable arguments. Right now, you would just define your fixed arguments and signature, and extra arguments just kind of go into this magical place where you retrieve them from func get args. Variax and Splats give you a more formalized way of getting at those things. So you would say function foo, $A, $B, args. And then args is going to be an array of all of the arguments that are left. And then Splat gives you the opposite. So instead of having call using func array, you can call a function and do $some array variable, and that'll be splatted out into the rest of the arguments of the function. We haven't picked that up in HHVM yet, but we're definitely going to do that because it's kind of a cool feature. You don't realize you need it until you need it, and then you're like, where have you been on my life? But that's sort of comparing us to PHP. And while we do have to compare ourselves to PHP because PHP is the 15-year-old kid on the block and we're some upstart Johnny-come-lately, we do have things that set us apart. Some stuff that is uniquely in HHVM, stuff that you're not going to find in PHP, either because PHP doesn't want it, or because it just wouldn't fit right into PHP, because PHP has some design limitations on the way it goes together. Some of these things, scalar typing. Everything is typable. If you don't like the fact that PHP has got a loose typing system and things are, you never really know if something's an integer or a string, and why is null equal to false equal to 0, but it's equal to empty string, but null is not equal to empty string. This gets in the way of that. And this says, okay, an integer is an integer, a string is a string, and we're going to track all these things through, and not only are we going to verify them as correct, we're going to do that before we even run the code. So we do static analysis on something we call hack. We're going to be talking a lot more about that in about a month, but it's been a long time coming, and I think the education is really awesome. Asynchronous coroutines. This allows us to essentially run two pieces of code in the same process request at the same time. It's kind of like threading, but it's not. It's more like state threading if you've ever heard of that. One part of the application runs until it hits a blocking point, maybe accessing a database or a file, and then it says, okay, I'm going to wait here, you go and run something else in my request. So it allows you to do things in parallel, much more efficient. Generics allow you to have class definitions that are not concrete in themselves, but can be instantiated to a specific type. That sounds really confusing, but it basically allows you to do something close to what templates are in C++, if you're familiar with that. Collections, these are like arrays on steroids. They are proper vectors, maps, sets, various structures like that, and you can stack them so that things are formally organized. And you don't have, let's say, an array of integers coming in when you're expecting a map of string to string. XHP is XHTML is the first class construct. I'll show you some examples of those. They're really awesome. And user attributes are kind of a throwaway, but they fit into something else, which I have personal interest. So, getting it installed, fortunately, has become really easy. About a year and a half ago when I joined this project, you had to clone the Git repo, find all the dependencies yourself, get them installed, whether they were from your OS or from source or whatever, usually from source because you needed the most latest and greatest version. We've been building Debugging packages for about a year now, and they come out roughly every other month with a new version. Plus, we build new packages every single night. So this morning at about 1 a.m., a new package of HHVM was built with all the latest and greatest features. So if you want to try it out, just grab a package. If you're on Debian or Ubuntu style distribution, it's like that, no problem. If you're not on one of those distributions, it can be a little bit more difficult, but fortunately not quite as bad as it used to be. The package that you get will work as a CLI, so you can run your command line scripts. I will warn you, it can tend to be slower than PHP on the command line just because of the cost of jitting things in the machine code. It depends on how your script runs. Fast CGI server, which is sort of the recommended way. You just plug it straight into Apache or Nginx and you're ready to go. Or what we call our live event server. This is actually an HTTP server that is built into HHVM. This is a little bit more robust than the development server you find in PHP. This is the server that's currently serving up all of Facebook's traffic. If you want to check it out, we actually have two versions of our site, hhvm.com and nightly.hhvm.com. Nightly, as you can imagine, is running on those nightly builds every single night. That FCGI server is restarted from the binary, or the regular one is running on what we consider our production release build. So 2.4.1 or 250 dev 2014 0303. 0305. It's today's effect. So, building. Like I said, this can be a little bit more daunting, so hopefully you have a Debian style OS to try this out on. But if not, it is at least CMake based. You run CMake, it'll tell you what dependencies you're missing, install those, and keep going. It can take a while to build. I do some development while I'm on a plane going to various places. I will compile it ahead of time so that when I'm on the plane, I only have to rebuild the files I'm working on because it can take half an hour to an hour to do a full build on my laptop. At least that build. So running a server, this is pretty straightforward. It's like, well, this side of it is running the HHVM fast CGI server, the part that listens to the web server to serve up the pages. Your configuration can be pretty small for an SCGI implementation, or slightly more complex if you're using the built-in web server. I really recommend using FCGI. You're just going to have a lot fewer headaches with it because you can do all your web server configuration in your web server where it belongs. It shouldn't be PHP's job to serve up static files. You know? I've got this particular example running on Fortnite Palace, which gets plugged into on the other side. I did not get my slide. You would have said, oh, sorry, this is correct. So I've got this set up. We're running HHVM over Unix domain socket at bar run HHVM socket. And we've got Nginx set up to send all fast CGI traffic to that socket. And that's it. We've got a web server, an HHVM answering requests, serving up the site at bar www. At no point are we compiling PHP scripts. I want to make that really clear because HHVM used to be something called HPHPC. There's waving going on over here. I'm not sure why.
I had a question. Do you want to save questions to the end, or?
Go ahead and throw that anytime.
Your last slide, it said requires a patched live event.
Ah, you saw that, did you? So, if you want to run the built-in web server, you're going to have to make your own build, and you're going to have to use live event 1 point whatever with a patch on top of it that changes some of the source of live event to make your own build. We're kind of trying to get rid of the live event server, and the pre-built packages that we have do not use this patched live event because Debian doesn't want us distributing our own version of live event. It's going to conflict with the real live event, obviously. So I'm glad mention that because I forgot to. Thank you. So where was I? Yeah, so we've got a running web server. We're not compiling anything. This is not HPHP where you had to take all the PHP scripts, translate them to C++, then run them through GCC, and then run one big web server. That hasn't even existed in the code base for the past year. And it hasn't been the recommended way of running it for at least the past year and a half. Put that out of your head. So, PHP already runs things really fast, right? At one point while I was working at Yahoo, Rasmus made the comment, you know, it amazes me sometimes how really good PHP is at running really bad code. And that's true. PHP 5.5 particularly has made a lot of improvements in terms of memory usage and CPU efficiency and accessing properties and variables and instructions really quickly. So I don't want to discount the advancements of PHP, but we're faster. Depending on the site that you're running, you will see anywhere between a 2x and a 10x improvement in speed. That means half to 1/10 as many servers that you have to run. If you're running more than one server, that's going to be saving you money right off the bat. I can't stress that enough. But who cares about performance, right? Nobody here cares about performance. I do say a range there between 2 and 10 because that does depend on sort of how your code base is laid out. There are, so the Facebook code base is laid out for HHVM, and HHVM was built for the Facebook code base. So unsurprisingly, Facebook's code gets the best speed up as compared to regular PHP. How does regular code fare? Well, I've got some stats I'll show you in a minute, but sort of the bottom end of that is a little known blogging platform called WordPress. Maybe you've heard of it. WordPress is a fantastic platform, don't get me wrong. It's a great platform, it's got tons of modules built for it, it's used around the world. But the organization of the code is really heavily focused on global scope and things like variable functions, and it's got a little bit of variables in there somewhere. It uses a lot of anti-patterns for performance, and there's only so much that any runtime can do to make up for it. So if you're looking at benchmarks, you're going to see kind of the worst performance down at that end. Let's talk a little bit about how it actually works, how it does what it does. This graph here is actually pretty close to PHP 5. When you get a request come in for a page, you say, has that page been modified since the last time we compiled it? If so, then you go to cache, recompile it to bytecode, and then run that bytecode for the request. If it hasn't been modified, just pull that out of the cache and run it. That's how PHP plus APC or Cloud Cache works, right? So what is HHVM? A whole bunch more boxes. For HHVM, we say, okay, we haven't modified, so our bytecode's good. Do we already have a native translation, a machine code translation? If so, great. Run that straight on the processor, no virtual machine in the way to actually have to translate it. If not, how many times have we run through this code before? Do we have a really good idea about how things branch, what sort of types different variables are going to have in them, what sort of common paths we're going to see? Where's our off path? If we've come to that point, which comes pretty quick, it comes usually after 2 to 5 requests, then we'll go ahead and translate that into machine code, throw that in the cache, and then from then on, we just run it immediately. If not, we'll go through and interpret bytecode just like PHP code. So you see that same sort of process that you would see with PHP and APC or op cache, where you have that, you gotta run through a few requests to figure out what the code's doing and actually warm things up. But there's a solution for that. We have a second running mode called Repo authoritative. In this mode, before we've ever started up the web server, we've pre-compiled that source script into bytecode. This bytecode is heavily analyzed. We don't have to say, oh crap, a request is coming in, translate this to bytecode and send it back. We can take our time with it. We can say, okay, well, this file includes this file, which includes this file, which includes this file. These classes inherit from those classes. We can make a lot more of a holistic analysis of what's going on in the program. We generate much better bytecode, and we generate some extra metadata to go with that. That metadata in bytecode feed into this compilation to native code and produce even better code. This is going to generate at least 10% bump to performance just by doing this ahead of time. Plus, you can actually do your deployments in production a lot faster. Because instead of pushing all of your scripts, which may be tens or hundreds or thousands of files, you push one SQLite database, and that's your entire site.
For a very large code base, how long does that processing take?
So Facebook's code base is pretty big. I don't know if I can talk about exactly how big, but it's quite large. And we tend to take, I think, 20 minutes to do the Repo authoritative analysis. For, let's say, WordPress, as an example, that comes back in a matter of 10 seconds. So the reality is going to lie somewhere between that spectrum. And part of that is because our analyzer looks at WordPress and says, I don't know what to do with this. So I said I promised some stats, so here's some stats. These are not generated by me or anyone at Facebook. These are people on the outside who said, hey, I wonder what HHVM can do for my favorite platform. This is Daniel Smooth. He is a Magento guy, loves Magento. And he said, here's how long these requests take under regular PHP. Here's how long they take under HHVM. I'm going to let those speak for themselves, because those are cool numbers. What sort of a percentage is that? That's about 3x improvement on that one. Probably 2x on some of these. Maybe as much as 5x on that one. But it's not just a response time, it's also how many requests per second can you manage. Well, there's a lot more requests per second on a single machine. That's what it looks like you're raising your hand?
Yeah. How do you compare it to the reference implementation Google has, which is 5x? The reference implementation for Google's PHP, it's about 5x faster than yours, which is 5x faster than the reference implementation of PHP itself, the base one. Google's implementation.
Google's implementation.
Yeah, they've got ones that
The
5x
thing they use on
faster than
App Engine?
yours. Yeah.
So the thing they use on App Engine is actually just regular PHP with some diffs put on top.
Well, no, they actual project, it may not be there, but they have one, they've done a custom, they have a project they opened up, an actual implementation with some tests.
They've done a complete rewrite?
Yeah.
I'm actually not aware of that.
Yeah, it's 5x faster than yours.
On App Engine is...
Yeah, now App Engine's, yeah, they're public-facing stuff. The stuff that's behind it on the real infrastructure, it's different. But one of my guys built my YouTube HTML5 app for like 1 billion users. So yeah, what and I know the App Engine guys, that's just their kind of Amazon killer front-end camel nose. With the real stuff they're doing custom on, there's a lot different than that.
I'd be curious to hear more about that
We'll
later.
talk offline.
Yeah, I'm not familiar with it. There are other sort of PHP drop-in replacements like Behlinger and I'm missing the name of the other one. Quarkus, that's not the one I was thinking of, but that's a good one. There are other ones out there, and they have different pluses and minuses to them. I'm not going to kind of speak to those unless we want to talk about them afterwards. But some more stats. This is looking at Symphony. Christian Stalker did these up. And I just gratuitously stole his slides. But all good numbers in my opinion. But that's enough about performance. Performance is cool, but at the end of the day, it's not necessarily enough of a carrot to lead you away from PHP. If PHP is running your site reliably, and you know it's running it reliably, and you don't want to risk moving off. When I was working for Yahoo, I looked at HHVM. It was HPHPC at the time again, and I said, no, I'm going to use this. Your site's going to come down. I can't risk this on something that's untested, and then I'm going to have to compile and do the other stuff. And it really didn't have much else going for it. Well, it's not just about performance. Hack, I mentioned that to sort of at the beginning. We have these sort of strict typing for PHP. It's something you can kind of migrate into as well. You can start by saying, I want this file and only this file to use strict typing, and other stuff that interacts with it. You can sort of fuzz things on the barrier. Or I want my whole site to use semi-strict typing, where I'll get some warnings in my error logs, but things will still move through. And then there is like, okay, I've done migrating everything, I've got clean error logs, now we're ready to go fully strict. And moving forward, we know that we're going to get code that stays clean and consistent. This means static type bits, which personally I think PHP should have. I vote for it every time it comes up, and it never passes. Return type bits, obviously we need to know what comes back from these functions. Typed properties. So in a class definition, you don't just say public $foo, you say public int $foo. Constructor promotion, I'll show you an example of that. Specializations with well, generics and with the array type. I can say that this is an array of integers, and only integers go in this array, and only integers will ever be taken out of this array. We can stack these together. Here's an array that acts like a map with string keys, and the values are arrays, which in turn have string keys and standard class values. We can make that as big or small as we need to be. The main part of the analysis is actually done statically, so as you're writing your program, you're going to have another window somewhere that says, oh, hey, you just called foo, passing it a string when it expects an integer. So you know these things as soon as you start writing. And we can call that type. That's what teacher is. So here's an example of some hack code. Like I said, we've got a private int, $num. Function say int on input. This particular one returns the object itself on output. Most of this should be pretty straightforward. At the bottom, I've got $f add banana to this class. Well, this class is expecting int. So I get an immediate error message saying, hey, you're calling this wrong, which is great. This is what I get over here, actually. Now we're going to add a constructor promotion into here. I'm no longer declaring that property. It's now down here in the constructor. I say construct private int num. Then as soon as that constructor runs, it actually executes the statement $this num equals $num. And num has the right visibility on it. So we get a little bit less boilerplate in what we put in our code. And then we take it a step further. We no longer want to have a class that specializes on ints and ints only. We want to have a class that can specialize on any primitive type. Foo is a foo of t. So when we instantiate, we say new foo of int. Now, this becomes private int num, get returns an int, add takes an int. T gets replaced everywhere in this function you want it to be, just like C++ templates.
What happens to that? What happens to the addition?
Well, so for integer types, obviously this works as expected. You know, this cell will be int, so int plus an int is an int, obviously. If I were to put string for t, this wouldn't quite behave the way I want it to. I would probably have a little bit more logic in here to check the type and switch on the behavior. What happens in the compiler, let's say we have a if get type, actually how would we do that? If t type equals int, do this, if t type equals string, do that. The compiler is just going to take it out for your specializations. And it's going to optimize those down to what they're actually meant to be. The foo class does not exist until you instantiate.
Does generic types work well with pattern matching? Is that something that, like Scala's pattern matching? Is that something that might be in the works?
I mean, that's one application. Maybe I misunderstood your question.
Oh. Like checking a type T. A nice construct.
Grab me afterwards, and we can, because I'm not quite sure I'm understanding what you're asking or saying.
Question over here.
Do the generics only work with scalars?
No, they work with any type, and you can have multiple parameterized types in there. So we get a foo of TK, TD, for example, and one could be a class, and the other could be an array of arrays of arrays.
Is everything you're adding hack stuff you're hoping to add to PHP?
So we've taken everything that we've come up with for hack, and we've kind of come up with this in the dark. I apologize for that. We have brought it back to the PHP group and said, hey, how much of this are people interested in? Largely not. That is sort of a side effect of people having asked for scalar type hinting for a very long time, and it's always come up as a very contentious issue. And this is sort of hanging off of scalar typing, because none of the rest of this makes sense without scalar type hinting, frankly. So each of the individual components of it are like, yeah, that sounds okay, but without scalar type hints, it doesn't make sense. And so we always come back to that same point. Did you have something?
Yeah, so are these just improvements to PHP, or are they just, by implementing these, you're getting additional performance improvements?
So the question is, are these improvements to PHP, or are we getting performance out of these as well? Right now, these are just language additions. And I should have mentioned one thing, by the way. See this different open type here? If you start a file with $PHP, that's PHP mode, and hack doesn't work, nor do a bunch of other features. You have to start with that HH to say we're sort of in this other language that looks like PHP but isn't.
That kind of leads to my question. If you're not saying why call it PHP, I think you're
there you go. So yeah, we try to act like PHP when we're in PHP mode, but when we're not in PHP mode, we can kind of do whatever we want. And this comes from all of us having to work with PHP and thinking a few of the things in the language don't really make a lot of sense. But back to your question, I've lost my train of thought.
The question was whether or not they're just improvements to PHP or performance improvements as well.
Yeah, so right now, a lot of these things, particularly hack, are not focused on improvement. They're focused on making development better, making sure that APIs don't wind up breaking because somebody changes one bit of code and assumes that all the callers are going to work with it properly. There are some plans to improve the runtime by using this information. Excuse me, I've got allergies. My nose is running out of sneezing. There are plans to improve performance by using some of this metadata, but we haven't gotten to that point yet because there's other performance space that we've been pulling out our speed gains from, which have been about another 50% since when was that? Towards the last September, I think was the last time. So yeah, we're definitely speeding up. And we'll get to those other stuff. I saw a hand way in the back.
Yeah, does this change in any way your approach to unit testing?
Does this change in any way your close?
Your approach to unit testing, your strategy, like in terms of easier mocking or like the typing that or no, not at all?
I would say no. We certainly have a ton of unit tests. I know because every time I try to make a change to HHVM, all N,000 of them get run against my change, and sometimes some of them break not because of my change, but because somebody writing regular PHP code has screwed something up. I mean, unit tests have a purpose, and the static analysis piece of it has its own purpose. They're not necessarily suiting either one's purpose. So I mentioned collections. I won't spend too much time on them, but these are like arrays on steroids, as I said. We've got vectors, which are specialized for iterating straight through or accessing specific points in them. So these are going to be numerically indexed. I've got a vector int here. If I want to get offset 5 into this vector, I know that I just start at the base and I go forward 5 points. With a regular array, you have to go, okay, I either have to step through this doubly linked list to get there, or I have to hash some value and then find the right bucket and then step into that linked list. It takes more time to get into a normal array than it does a vector. Sets are not quite as read focused, but they are at least unique sets, so you're not going to have two duplicated values in them. We're going to do that. Maps are pretty close to normal arrays, frankly, because there's only so many ways you can create a map of key values. And there's mutable and frozen versions. They act kind of like objects with array access on them. Not much else to say about that. Async functions, I described these briefly. I don't have real code to show you here because a little bit of that syntax is still in flux, but there actually are some people using async functions externally, despite the fact that we have not documented them at all, because they're pretty cool. This allows you to marshal out a whole bunch of requests to a bunch of backends, which a lot of us have to do for our site, and we don't have to worry about putting these all into a big curl multi-handle and winding it or anything like that. It's just sort of magically does everything for you, switching between different points. they're sort of an extension of generators, because you have continuable code in various points of your stack.
Excuse me?
Yep.
Can you put an alarm on that or something and just give up if they don't come back?
Yes, yes. This example is going to wait forever, but the await itself is an object, and that object has methods on it that say things like do not wait more than X milliseconds, or once a couple of rules have been satisfied, give up on the others, things like that. So you can create a lot of workflow logic into it. User attributes. These are kind of silly thing. If you've used your attributes in other languages like Java, they'll be familiar to you. This just lets you give some metadata about the program that you're writing. They don't really have anything to do with code execution. I've got a function here that was written by S. Ullman, and it's kind of a cloning function. That's all I'm saying about it. You can introspect these through reflection and get information out of it. Why am I even mentioning them? Because they're going to come into extension writing. XHP, this is one of the coolest things in my opinion. You actually don't even need hack turned on for this. This is a feature by itself. This creates XHTML tags as first-class objects within the language. How many people have written code like this at some point in their lives? And it's okay to raise your hand. A lot of us have done this because this is a really easy piece of code to get wrong. This particular code, we are getting a username and a password from an HTML form. We're validating that. It hasn't been validated. We just want to display the login form. Pretty simple. Trouble is, we're outputting these get variables straight to HTML. And anyone with half a clue of XSS can construct a URL that's going to steal users' cookies without them even being aware of it. Because you can chuck this into like image tags and things to get them to automatically execute very easily. This is the kind of thing that used to keep me up at night. Literally, it woke me out of a Percocet-induced haze in a hospital because I suddenly realized that Yahoo Search Japan had a massive XSS vulnerability in it. And I called up one of my coworkers and I said, fix this now, I'm going back to sleep. How do you solve that problem, right? Like, how do you keep this data from being output? There have been a lot of solutions to that. One of the solutions at Facebook was to put all the user-supplied data into special objects, and the real data would be hidden in this private variable that you had access to functions to make them script or whatever. The real data was in a variable called, property called do not access me or you will be fired. People still access that. It's amazing how easy it is for people to just sort of ignore that. Our solution to that, and other things, is XHP. Now, if you look at this code here, you'll see there's no quotes here. I'm just saying $form equals a form tag, and then some tags, and then another tag. The runtime is looking at this and it says, okay, form is a tag. It has a semantic meaning for me. It has a purpose for being. And the stuff that I'm putting into that tag, that's data. That should not be rendered to the browser as markup. That should just be rendered to the browser as content. So when it actually goes to output this in our echo statement here, our form is inside here. Well, we know within the $form that we have real tags. So those are okay if output is tagged. But this other stuff inside these properties, we're going to HTML, special cars, or whatever, encode them so that they come out safely. It's really hard to get non-markup to come out as markup using XHP. I say really hard, but there's actually a backdoor. Because obviously you need backdoors. I don't know if I have an example of backdoor on here anymore. I think I took it out for everyone's safety. So XHP is extensible. You've got all the XHTML5 components in there. You can also make your own component. I'm making a tag called mySite::, and the definition of that tag is a div class that contains a couple of links. The contents of those links will be whatever the site's prefix is, / whatever paths to the various links, and the site's prefix. Where am I coming up with prefix? It was maybe a bad example. Well, bottom line is XHP markup. You can put attributes and things in there like that. If what you need to create is not HTML tags, you can output a string, and that is one of the places where you can sneak raw HTML out.
So I think XHP's been around for a while.
It has.
And so I guess a kind of question I have, maybe this is explained somewhere around mine, but I was trying to just like do a loop inside of a parent. The template, it looked like I couldn't just like do the for loop inside. I don't know, how do you deal with like when you have many nested child elements within the parent element? Do you have to like do add child one at a time, or is there a syntax for it?
So you've got a node that has multiple children in it.
Yeah, like let's say a list of bits.
And you're wanting to iterate over the children of that node?
Like I've got a parent div, and inside that div are 10 profile pictures.
Right.
Each one's a picture, and I want to iterate over and add children.
So you should just be able to iterate over that root node, and it'll give you the children as the value of the for each. Yeah, at least we can look at it more after. But I'm pretty sure you can for each that. I actually don't write a lot of PHP code myself, so sometimes I'm fuzzy on the details of that. A lot of XHP is actually written as PHP, like all the tag implementations are just straight PHP code. There is also an extension for regular PHP that'll let you run XHP on a normal PHP instance. So if you're not interested in HHVM, I would at least recommend this, because this is pretty cool. And you don't have to wake up in a hospital bed at 2 o'clock in the morning, drugged out of Percocets, thinking about Japanese syrup. What else was I going to say about this? This is kind of unimportant. There are sort of base tags, HTML elements, make generic new tags. We want to bring the blink tag back. Generate a blink tag. We can also have alternate output here. So normally this is just going to make a blink element. We could have another version that says, oh, if this browser version is known not to support blink, we'll output a span tag and some JavaScript with it, and it'll act like blink. But as far as your designers are concerned, they're just putting blink down. So that can be cool. The HPHP debugger. This is sort of like Xdebug with had a baby with GDB. This allows you to debug running applications on a web server, or just do a little load up a script and run it on the command line. Either way, set breakpoints, watches, all the stuff you expect from a property bugger, right? I'm not going to get into the details of that because I'm going to talk about my favorite topic. My favorite topic is extending PHP. Wrote a book about it. It gave me its own form of nightmares. Extending HHVM is its own matter because we have re-implemented the entire engine and runtime from scratch, so we have a completely different API, which I can hear you saying, oh, I don't want to learn Zending, that was horrible. Why would I want to look at another one? Well, here's what regular PHP's extensions look like. I don't expect you to read this. This is the source code for the array column function that was added in PHP 5.5. I had compacted it down as much as I can. I took out comments, I moved things up onto multiple lines to try to make it fit in a slide, and it's still ridiculously small font. This is the amount of pain that you have writing an extension for PHP. Here is the exact same function written for HHVM. Now, I can hear you complaining, but that's PHP code. That's cheating. And you're right, it is. But the first thing I want to point out is, you can write extension code as PHP. Because we are jigging this down to machine code. It's going to run as fast as C or C++ code in most cases anyway. Not every case, I'll admit that. But yeah, fair enough, it is completely a cheat. In reality, the reason you're writing extensions is not to take some PHP code and stick it in the runtime so that it loads every time. In reality, you're wrapping some C library because you need to create some database bindings or something like that. So let's see what it looks like in C++. Still pretty, isn't it? This is C++ code. We're defining an HHVM function, array column. We're taking an array, a variant, and a variant. Moving through it like for each. This code looks almost exactly identical to the PHP code that we just used. Because I used to hate C++. I thought it was a terribly ugly and terrifying language. It's probably makes me weird. That is beautiful code, in my opinion. How do we plug that into the runtime? Obviously, just writing the function in C++ isn't the only thing we need to do. What we do is we create these little native user attributes on any function we want to cross that barrier to C++. We call this HNI. If you use Java and you use JNI, you might recognize the principle behind it. We say this is a native function. It takes a string, returns an array. So we borrow that hack syntax for the types. That maps into this internal function. Y class, query, takes a string, returns an array. And that's all you have to do, plug in a function.
Are you defining those in the same file?
No, these are separate files. Good question. So typically these will be separate files. Theoretically, you could do that in a single file, but it would be ugly and I wouldn't recommend it. This will be something like xarray.php, and this will be xarray.cpp. So when the source code in xarray CPP loads, it's going to say my system lib is over there at xarray.php. And that's when they'll actually come together. Theoretically, you could have an eval inside your module in it to actually create these bindings, but I wouldn't recommend it. So that's really all I came to talk about. HHVM, I think it's cool. Some resources. We are on IRC. There's usually something there at any hour of the day in HHVM. We've also got HHVM-dev for actual development of the runtime if you're interested in that. This is more of a using HHVM sort of thing. Yep.
Will this slide presentation be available for us to see later?
So I have a slightly older version of this deck already uploaded actually. It's at dl.hhvm.com/resources and you can drill into there and find it.
So we'll have one better for you. The entire presentation has been recorded. So there will be any recording we do will always be at http://s.sfphp.org/live. Yeah. If you go to it, it's the YouTube channel that's linked on the left-hand side.
Back there.
So I think I'm just a little bit confused. When I started learning about HHVM, I guess about a year ago, I was learning about it just kind of almost as like an after-the-fact execution engine, where you'd like take your WordPress or Symfony project, something like that, and then you'd swap out, I guess, PHP's execution engine for something like that. But are you guys moving in kind of a direction of making your own language? Is that the goal here, that it'll be like Ruby, Python, PHP, HHVM?
So a little bit of both. Like I said, when you started a file with less than $PHP, you're in PHP mode, and that should always match PHP. And we're going to try our best to make sure it always matches PHP, bug for bug, and there are a lot of bugs. When you start with less than HH, that's sort of our new language, what we call hacklang. It looks like PHP. It definitely borrows a lot from PHP, but at the end of the day, we're adding enough things to it that it'll eventually become almost unrecognizable.
Nice.
One of the big issues that I've run into when trying to convert our code base to HHVM is modules that don't exist. Do you guys have like some documentation in terms of how to transform existing PHP modules into something that works with the API?
So there's multiple answers to that. First answer is we've been working really hard to get those modules to exist. I have been pounding my head into the Intel extension for the past couple of weeks, and I swear I don't want to ever see an Intel extension function again. But we're doing our best to at least make sure that all the stuff that's built into PHP will be available in HHVM. We're going through one extension at a time. Second answer to that is one of the guys on my team, Paul Tarjan, has written basically a source compatibility layer. He calls it XSendCompat. This will take a regular PHP extension and build it to talk to HHVM. There is some inefficiencies in doing that, and it doesn't work with all extensions, but he's made it work with a surprising number of extensions, more than I would have thought. And the third answer to that is how can you help us with some of that work? So like I showed, the API for writing extensions for HHVM is actually a lot easier to work with than PHP, but that only goes so far if it's not documented. One of my jobs over the course of the next 2 weeks is to make that documentation awesome so that we can release it at the same time that we do the main hack announcements.
Does this cover the GC?
So we have garbage collectors. We say the GC, which...
in the sense that can I just keep allocating strings and it will not run?
Yes, yeah. So,
What's the question?
the question was, what sort of garbage collector have we got? And yeah, I mean, if you, let's say, do while true, $s equals still repeat a 1 million. That's going to allocate a 1,000,000 byte string, store it into a variable, and then the next iteration is going to allocate a 1,000,000 byte string and store it into that same variable. So that first one fell out of scope, and it should die off. In sort of the normal flow, it kind of acts like PHP's ref counting, so the variable will be dropped to ref count to 0, and it will be thrown away immediately. Obviously, you can still get things like circular reference chains. We do have a garbage collector that will kick in if it feels like it's needed. I say if it feels like it's needed because most requests take a very short amount of time, so we don't want to interrupt them with garbage collection. If a request is taking a very large amount of time, or if it's hitting like memory limits really quickly, there's a separate thread that's going to watch that and is going to interrupt it for garbage collection.
Question.
UTF-8. Are you treating it any differently than
So we don't treat UTF-8 any differently. We're not trying to do what PHP 6 did, which is to create a Unicode string. We rely on the util extension and other extensions like that to give the user some way to say, well, I've got UTF-8 input, and I need to find the graphemes in this section of it. Call up util's grapheme API, and that is going to be what you're going to do. There's still murmurs of trying to resurrect Unicode support for PHP 6. We're going to kind of watch that and see what PHP does and follow suit. Maybe.
I have a couple of questions. So, one is, as you keep developing this HH language, say, with all the cool features, do you ever do you practice here you background compatible just with the HH language, or sometimes you develop new features that you break? Because if I would be writing HH code, they have every now and then refactoring because of the version of HHVM.
So yeah, how cognizant of backwards compatibility or syntax are we being? Certainly PHP backwards compatibility for the main PHP project has always been like goal number 1. That's why we have so many inconsistencies in the language. I'm saying we with my PHP hat on now, because I also have been working on the PHP language for a dozen years. Within HHVM, we have that same sort of philosophy of once something's out there, we want to try to avoid changing it if at all possible, both for external users and for our own people. I mean, there's a lot of code at Facebook, and we don't want to have to refactor it all the time just because something seems like a better idea. Yeah, I think that's as much of an answer as I can.
So Sara, following on from that, obviously HipHop sort of disappeared relatively quickly. As you said, most people probably wouldn't want to use it. What are you sort of committing to publicly about the lifetime of HHVM?
So I'll give you more of the history on HipHop to kind of put that in perspective. The original HPHPC, it was put together by Haiping because, well, this is sort of apocryphal, but he didn't like PHP as a language, and he thought we should really change the whole site to use C++. So he wrote HPHPC as intending it to be a one-time translator. We're going to take all the code, make C++ out of it, and then that's what we're going to maintain going forward. The reality of that is that, well, the C++ it generated was kind of open, and most of our engineers were not equipped to just start doing things in C++ all of a sudden. Plus, all the opportunities to shoot yourself in the foot. So we knew as soon as we started using it that this was not going to be a long-term viable solution, and that's why we started working on the VM actually 4 years, more than 4 years, like 5 years ago. The VM was the plan, and we don't have plans of replacing it with something else. If we did, it would be years before we can even get to that point. So in that context, I can't imagine us not keeping up the HHVM road for any part of the foreseeable future. And you said you had a two-parter.
Yes. The other one is about threads. Are you planning to add some other software for multi-threading, or?
Right. So HHVM is a multi-threaded application. Unlike PHP, which was built for multi-process a single frame within the process. HHVM was built for single process, multi-thread. We do not have any support for a single request splitting off into multiple threads and then rejoining. I personally, in my own repository, am working on something to do that as an extension. So you'll probably see me personally release a third-party extension that does that. I don't think there's a lot of interest in making that part of the main language, at least initially. If it comes out as good as I think it will, maybe we'll merge that.
Is there any sort of like tools for migrating? In other words, like the soft failing, like leaving notes saying what types it detected above every function?
Yes, as a matter of fact. One of the parts of the hack analyzer is the start and the up mode. And it will go through and actually rewrite your code for you and say, well, you're always calling this with an int, so I'm sure this is an int. You're usually calling this with an int, so I'm going to make this a soft int. You're calling this with all kinds of stuff. I don't know what you're doing. I'm going to make this a mixed. And it'll go through and fill those types for you automatically, and then you can go back and update them yourself. Because there actually are multiple ways of declaring a type. Right. So I could say int to say this must be an int. I can say question mark int to say this can be an int or a null. I could say @int to say this really should be an int, but if it's not, it's okay. Just throw a warning, it's fine. And there's one in the mode.
Oh, speaking of that, multi-threaded apps, like instances of virtual machine to help do a lot of that. Have you looked at like how Dart uses the isolates, where you can control
I haven't
the threads?
personally.
Yeah.
So I should say that my role in the project is largely on the open source side. My job is to make sure the runtime supports all the stuff that PHP does. It's to do outreach stuff like coming to user groups and just kind of talking about it. We have other people who are focused really strongly on performance and translations and things like that. They would be better suited to answer that, and I can put you in touch with one of them if you're interested.
Is there a way of knowing what HHVM was incapable of cheating because the code is too crappy or uses like WordPress kind of constructs?
So yeah, we have a mode called Analyze. Analyze will tell you a lot of things about your code. One of the things it'll tell you is you've got a big block of code here that I couldn't JIT because it's in the global scope. It'll also tell you, hey, you appear to be calling this function that returns void and assigning its results into a variable. It'll tell you you're calling this one with too many args and they're being ignored. It'll tell you various things about your code base. Again, without running it, this is just like analysis kind of stuff that it'll look at your code.
Facebook had a linter. They dropped support for it.
That's not true. So the thing I just described is the linter. And you can still use it. It's still totally So we had, for a while there, we were producing two different binaries. One called HPHP and one called HHVM. And you would use the HPHP binary to do analysis or building a repo or actually cross-compiling to C through C++, basically HPHP mode. That binary is gone, but the HHVM binary has an HPHP mode. So you do HHVM-HPHP, and then all that stuff is available there except for the cross-compile C++.
Are there plans on releasing specifications for both Hack and your implementation of PHP?
I wasn't planning to talk about this, but yes. We have a specification writer who is working on a specification objectively, not an HHVM specification, but here is PHP code, and this is the way that it is expected to behave in the language. And in those few places where PHP and HHVM differ, he's putting those annotations in and saying, well, this implementation does this, and this implementation does this. And I've seen it, and it looks like a really awesome specification. This guy has worked on specifications for C in the past. He knows what he's doing.
Do you Facebook have any plans to adding support for Hack in the HHVM debugger to later features?
So this has actually been on the table for. Excuse me. This has been on the table for a bit. I'm trying to wipe my nose in front of a camera with my fingers. So the short answer to that is yes. It would be really awesome if we supported the XDebug protocol. probably the PHP DBG protocol, and a couple of others, just because there's tooling out there for that already. So it'd be really great if we could just plug into that tool. It's definitely on the plan, we just haven't gotten to it yet.
Also, how final is hack as a
Pretty close. Although that's a loaded statement because it's a moving target as well. You know, in terms of the features that are on the list of like what I've talked about, all except for the async coroutines are pretty well what they're going to be at this point. Async coroutines is a little bit up for grabs, and there's a few things that are kind of on the drawing board yet that don't exist, so they can't run.
So I thought hack hadn't been released yet, and you've also been hinting at an announcement next month.
Right.
So if I were to go download the stable version tonight, how much of that is it?
So there's two pieces to hack. There's the runtime support, which has been going out to GitHub for at least the past year now. And that's why we have projects like Beatbox is a framework built for HHVM that's been using all this hack stuff, and they've been building that up for quite a while now, because all the runtime pieces are there. Trying to filter that out of the push would be more work than it was worth. The other half of that is the static analyzer, the stuff that looks at your program as you're writing it. That is a separate application that has not been released yet, and that will be part of our upcoming announcements. Careful with my wording. Okay.
Yeah, so I'm actually a Magento developer, and I've read a lot of awesome stuff about what's the speed and so forth. But how realistic do you see it in like a production environment when you're working with maybe a huge framework like Magento, where you don't have control over code that will be released with a new release of the framework itself? I mean, do you see it as being realistic to use, just switch out PHP, and even if you don't have control over the entire code base, or most of it?
Yeah, is the short answer to that. I mean, okay, you may not have control over what's going to change in the framework from version to version, and you need to upgrade, and you need to make sure that works. Obviously, that means you need to test out a new version before you put it in production, but hopefully you're doing that already. Like, just because they say it works with PHP doesn't mean it really works with PHP. So you still have to do that due diligence, by the way. And yeah, I mean, I see them in unequal footing. Well, partially. Like, PHP is a little bit ahead of HHVM in the sense that people who are working on Magento are thinking of PHP first. They might be thinking of HHVM as well, but they're thinking of PHP first, and they're testing it against PHP. They're running their unit tests against 5.6 or whatever. They're not running them against HHVM, or at least not all. So hopefully we can get more people excited about HHVM and that changes. Yes?
What's the roadmap on Windows support?
Elizabeth is working on it right now. So what's the roadmap for Windows support? So there's more to that answer. We have a Mac build, a Mac OS build, and you can run HHVM in interpreter mode on Mac OS. You can't run it in JIT mode because the OS makes different assumptions about the code that you're producing. So our JIT doesn't work with Mac until somebody's going to sit down and take the time to make it work. And then we're going to have a testing schedule to go with that to make sure it doesn't break along the way. So for right now, Mac is JIT only, so you're not going to see the big performance boost happen. The port that Elizabeth is working on for Windows is going to be interp only initially, and probably for quite some time to come. Yeah.
The user attributes. How would you differentiate those from annotations? They seem to cover a similar.
Well, they really are annotations at the end of the day. How you differentiate them? Right now in PHP, you don't have annotations apart from which one the doc block. These are like actually in the code. So
is there a reason for doing a new notation?
Oh yeah. So why do we have them? They're easier to introspect through reflection. You go into reflection, you say new reflection function, get annotation foo. It'll actually give you, the structured data within that. Whereas an annotation that's sitting in your doc block, you have to parse that out. kind of the difference there. And yeah, I agree with what you're kind of illustrating there.
So I've got two-parter. One is for your intermediate representation. Is there like any plans at all like on exposing that as like an action?
Yes. So our intermediate, well, actually, hold on, back to that. Which intermediate representation? Because we've got a few.
Right. So I guess I'm not sure. Whatever happens before the motion.
Oh yeah. Okay. So our right code. Yeah. So I actually left one piece out there. We compiled the PHP source to bytecode. That bytecode goes to something we call intermediate representation, and then that goes to machine code. The bytecode is something we actually have exposed already. You can write full functions in HipHop bytecode. You would make it it's less than question mark HHVM is what that is, and then you put out these bytecodes. We in practice only use that for a couple of functions in our system right now. Because we use specialized bytecodes that cannot be produced by our Go script. Like you explicitly say, I'm using this special bytecode for what I'm doing. We don't have any way to output that right now within a program. But if you run a script, you can say HHVM, some file name, -v, dump bytecode =1, and you will get what the bytecode for that script is. So there's a little bit of IO there. And you said it was two-part?
Yeah, the other part was just like Zen never lets you do like crazy things like rewrite the Zen execute functions. So you just totally decide how to make the activity.
Yeah.
Is there any plans that crazy like that?
My answer to that's going to be no. I'm trying to think of what that would even look like. I mean, the answer is kind of yes. Because this is all C++ code, so it's all a bunch of objects. You could replace the instance of the compiler object in the execution context. You could replace the instance of the translator object. Right? So actually, I think my answer to that is yes. I had never stopped to think about that, but yes, you could theoretically replace any components along that chain. It would be an undocumented and unsupported thing at this point, but you could do it. In the green.
What is like the committee behind HHVM? Is it just Facebook employees right now? And is there a plan, like as it gets kind of wider and wider scope, to become more of, I don't know, maybe like an open source community or open committee or something like that?
Yeah, so right now, HHVM's direction is dictated by Facebook. Right. It is, my team of a dozen people who are working on it every day. We have actually moved our discussion from an internal group to an external group. So you can join that group. That's this one. I was getting to that on the slide. hhvm.com/fb/dev will get you to our externally facing development group. You can join that and take part in those discussions. Its development happens on our internal Git repository, and then it gets pushed up to GitHub. So it's sorry, I didn't know there. So it's still a very internally focused process. I want that to be externally focused. I don't like the fact that we're not a real open source project. We are a project that gets pushed out to the open. And it's not the same thing in my head. Most of my team comes from Microsoft, and they don't entirely get that distinction, but I'm trying to train them as best as I can. Because I think an open source project can't really thrive unless it has everyone in the room, right? An open source project is just, an open source project like this one is right now is a closed source project where you can see the source and talk about it. It's not the same. But I'm working on fixing that. Yeah.
I was just curious how close HHVM is to like 100% PHP compatibility.
So it depends on which metric you're talking about. If we're talking about syntax, we're pretty darn close. I had that slide earlier that just said variax is flat, but the only thing missing from being in line with 5.6. When it comes to the runtime, all the stuff in the standard MySQL, SQLite, whatever extensions. It's hard to put a really strong metric on because we don't look at it in terms of we are X% done. We look at it in terms of we've got these big ones, we're missing this big one. We've got a whole bunch of these middle ones, we're missing these middle ones, and we've got a couple of the little ones, and we're missing a whole lot of little ones. If I had to throw a number on it, 60%. That's the total swag.
Maybe it'd be easier to say like percentage of big projects.
Yes, thank you for that. Are you sure you're not an audience one? So we have a page on hhvm.com, hhvm.com/frameworks. We are looking at the top 25 frameworks according to GitHub, and we are running all of their unit and various tests against HHVM. I think right now 7 of those have 100% passing, and the rest have some number between 85 and 99% passing.
Is there any plan on how to deal with like third-party proprietary extensions?
So we have a means to write, so you can write your own extension using the extension API I glanced at there, and you can load them up as dynamic loadable extensions. So you can distribute DSOs of an extension. I'm trying to model this a lot on how PHP's extension API works.
Well, I mean, like if I have an extension for PHP, is there any way, you mentioned the wrapper. Is there any way to get that proprietary PHP extension to run?
This extension which you may not even have the source for.
Yep.
So right now, no. Theoretically, somebody could build a binary API compatibility layer. So we can tell it's HHVM at one end, and then DL opens a PHP extension on the other end. That would be a big undertaking. I don't have plans to work on that right now, personally. I have a lot of dirty work to get through before that. Yeah?
Are you aware of any IDEs or software text editors that have that support?
So we've got modules for Vim and Emacs already. People who are working on hacks like Emacs, so they pay a lot of attention to that one. We'd like to get Clips and a few other editors to. We'd like to get some modules for those as well. We just don't have enough yet. That's definitely an important thing. Oh, I didn't even mention FBIDE. We have our own editor as well. It's a web-based editor. You run it on your server where you got your source code at, and it's just basically tabbed editing. It does auto completion. It does searches through your code base. It has integration with HPHP debugger, so you can set your watch points and breaks and everything in that thing. I think we're releasing it at the same time we release Hack. I'm not sure.
Cool.
Yeah. Are we out of questions?